Hello, my name is Darren Newell, and we are the Byte Bandits. We will be diving into the network vulnerability assessment our team has put together and touch on different topics that pertain to an analysis of Sandtech's environment and recommended mitigation strategies, as well as pre-existing and future compliance standards that need to be met. First slide, please. Okay, so today I would like to cover some of the pre-existing as well as future standards or policy requirements that are aligned with Sandtech's current and related business functionalities. Much of the software that is sold, such as managed endpoint security, VPN as a service, and identity as a service, along with many others, must adhere to certain provisions that allow for a safe and reputable experience for both the company and its clients. A great starting point for making sure you can begin dealing with government contracts are making sure you get proper registration and ID numbers for your business and meet the standard size requirements, in which Sandtech falls under the small business category with less than 500 employees and below annual receipts of 7.5 million. In addition, registration with systems for acquisition management and maintaining compliance, as well as meeting cybersecurity requirements, are necessary. Any company that exceeds $5 million in government contracts that span longer than 120 days must have a written code of business ethics, as well as formal training programs and ethics hotline. Sandtech has the proper fulfillments in place in regard to the federal acquisition regulations, as well as the Federal Acquisition Streamlining Act. Next slide, please. There are 110 controls organized by the 14 control families within the NIST 800 through 171 that are spread out. Each of the families holds specific requirements and guidelines pertaining to their correlation with that organization. All of the controls ensure all of their information with the CUI is protected. The controls are the following: access control, which limits access to authorized users and devices; awareness and training ensures personal understanding of cybersecurity risks and responsibilities; audit and accountability establishes audit logs and monitoring; configuration management, which manages system configurations and changes securely; identification and authentication verifies user device identities before granting access; incident response detects, analyzes, and responds to security incidents; maintenance controls system maintenance and ensures security during updates; media protection safeguards digital and non-digital media containing CUI; personal security screens personal and enforces security policies; physical protection protects physical access to CUI and IT systems; risk assessment identifies and mitigates security risks; security assessment conducts regular security evaluation; system and communications protection ensures encrypted communication and secure system design; and lastly, all of systems and information integrity detects and mitigates system vulnerabilities. All of these steps stress the importance of protecting the CUI and what is to be maintained to stay NIST 800 through 171 compliant. These controls are used in the ISO 27001 as 2022 certification that Sandtech currently has in place and was just re-audited in January of 2025. The same controls will be applied to them in the fall. Next slide, please. I will be addressing some of the other compliance standards that Sandtech has in place, such as ISO 9001 2015, which sets criteria for quality management systems. This compliance requirement is the only one within the 9000 family in which leads to a formal certification and aims to improve customer satisfaction, identify inconsistent processes, help organization meet requirements, and emphasize continuous improvement. The standard as a whole increases customer trust, ensuring there are sound and quality control practices in place, cost savings and productivity gains, and that a company strives for continuous improvement. 10 clauses are outlined within the standards, and 4 of those being auditable requirements that the company must undergo. Next slide, please. Observations of the policy NIST 800 through 53, which acknowledge best practices for password policy review guidelines, meets the minimum requirements set from the information available to us, with 8 characters being the ideal goal to aim for and 15 being the best possible, with 1 upper and 1 lowercase character, which also have 1 number and special character to provide for the optimal security measures. User access reviews play a crucial role in compliance within this framework as well, creating a documented and updated spreadsheet of databases, applications, and systems to help determine who all have access to this information, whether employees, vendors, consultants, and service providers. Reports should be generated to each asset owner in order to verify if any need to be limited or revoked in regards to that individual level/role. The importance of this least privilege dynamic will allow for limits to user access for only the resources and data needed to perform their jobs, which in turn reduces the risk of data breaches and insider threats. Next slide, please. Santec is also in full compliance of NIST 800 through 37, which is the risk management framework and is a guide for managing security and privacy risks in information systems, providing for a more structured and flexible process in order for the implementation of security controls to assess their effectiveness and ability to continuously monitor the environment and its security posture. The RMF is designed to be used throughout the entire life cycle of an information system from the start of its initial development. The RMF outlines a 7-step process, including firstly, preparation, which involves identifying high-value assets and establishing organizational policies and procedures. Step 2, which is categorization. This step involves sorting information systems based on the potential impact of a security breach. Selection involves selecting security controls based on the system's categorization and their organization's risk tolerance. Step 4, implementation, which involves implementing the selected security controls. Assessment, assessing the effectiveness of the implementations relying on the previous steps considerations. Step 6, authorization involves authorizing the system to operate based on the results of the assessment. And finally, monitoring. This last step relies on constant monitoring of the current established security controls to make sure that they remain effective. And that is all for my part. I'm going to be passing it on to Lynn next.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie Matteo, and I helped in standards and compliances we recommend implementing. The Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC, is a compliance framework created by the U.S. Department of Defense. Its main goal is to ensure that all organizations working with the DoD, whether directly or through subcontracting, follow baseline cybersecurity practices. These requirements are particularly focused on protecting sensitive, unclassified data that could be valuable to adversaries if leaked. Unlike previous systems that rely mostly on self-attestation, CMMC introduces more formalized assessments. In short, if your organization wants to bid on or fulfill a DoD contract in the future, having a CMMC certification will be mandatory. So we strongly recommend this for Santec due to you working closely with the DoD. Next slide, please. CMMC 2.0 was introduced to streamline the original model and reduce the burden on contractors. It narrows the certification down to 3 maturity levels instead of 5. Level 1 is for companies with lowest risk and always self-assessment. Level 2 involves more rigorous requirements and typically requires a third-party assessment, depending on the sensitivity of the work. Level 3 is reserved for organizations handling the most critical information and will be assessed directly by the DoD. Each level requires the implementation of specific cybersecurity practices, but CMMC 2.0 emphasizes clarity, flexibility, and reduces redundancy in its approach. This update was a response to feedback from industry stakeholders who found the original model too complex and costly. Next slide, please. CMMC matters because it directly supports national security. The Department of Defense relies heavily on a vast network of contractors and subcontractors, many of whom handle sensitive information. Any weak link in the supply chain poses a risk. CMMC is designed to raise the minimum cybersecurity standards across all participants, no matter their size. Importantly, this is not optional. Once fully implemented, organizations that do not comply with CMMC requirements will be ineligible for DoD contracts. This includes subcontractors who may not even realize that they fall under the rule. Since enforcement is approaching, companies are encouraged to start assessing their cybersecurity posture and take steps towards certification early. This will avoid bottlenecks when demand for assessors increases. Next slide, please. A top-down security approach means that leadership, executives, board members, and senior management are directly involved in shaping the organization's security strategy. Rather than treating cybersecurity as just an IT function, this method treats it as a business-wide priority that supports the organization's mission and goals. When leadership is engaged, it sends a message throughout the company that security matters at every level. This involvement is also critical for allocating proper funding, establishing accountability, and influencing cultural change. Without executive support, cybersecurity programs often lack the authority or resources to be fully effective. Next slide, please. These are the first three essential steps in a top-down methodology. First, leaderships must commit. This includes setting cybersecurity goals, assigning responsibilities, and budgeting for resources. Without this foundation, the rest of the process lacks direction. Next, organizations need clear policies and governance to define who does what and how decisions are made. The third step is performing a risk and gap assessment. This means identifying your assets, threats, and where your current security posture is lacking. Next slide, please. After that, it's time to implement technical and administrative controls, ensure staff are trained, and enforce compliance. Finally, cybersecurity must be a continuous process. Regular monitoring and improvements are needed to stay ahead of evolving threats. Next slide, please. The benefits. There are several key benefits for a top-down approach. First, it aligns cybersecurity with the organization's overall mission. This ensures resources are used efficiently and risks are managed according to business priorities. It's also simplified compliance with regulations and framework like CMMC, where leadership accountability and cross-departmental coordination are crucial. By defining roles early and from the top, decision-making is faster and more consistent. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, this method fosters a strong security culture. When employees see that leadership takes security seriously, they're more likely to adopt safe practices and report incidences, making the organization more resilient overall. And that's it for my part. I'm going to hand it over to Ronald.
Thank you, Stephanie. Hello, my name is Ronald Garcia. I'm one of the technical leads for Byte Bandits, and today we're going to talk about we've been assigned to Santec to perform a vulnerability assessment of their network. And in order for us to access their network, the team at Santec gave us access to their VPN to access their network. Once I accessed their network, I performed some discovery scans to see what subnets are up and running. And after performing those scans, it showed that there was two subnets up and running. The first one being 10.0.2.0, and the other one being 172.16.1. I focused more on the 10.0.2 subnet for this, and after performing more scans on the 10.0.2 subnet to see if there were any hosts up, I saw that there was 4 hosts up and running, and then there were the following. The results showed that the 4 hosts were up were the 10.0.2.2, the 10.0.2.3, the 10.0.2.4, and the 10.0.215. All these scan results were performed using Nmap. Next slide, please. So after finding those 4 hosts up and running, I decided to do a more in-depth scan, more stealth scans using ZenMap. And I use ZenMap because ZenMap gave more comprehensive results than just using regular Nmap. So after performing ZenMap scans for all of the 4 hosts, this is what came back for our 4 hosts. Starting with the 10.0.2.2, the stealth scan showed that HTTP, RTSP, and SSL had expired all the way back in 1997. The scan also showed that there's a potential vulnerability on this host, a message signing enabled but not required. After doing a little bit more research about this, this turns out to be a man-in-the-middle attack, and this has a medium threat level. Moving on to the 10.0.2.3 host, the scan also showed expired HTTP, RTSP, and SSL. The scan also showed the same vulnerability as the previous host, the message signing enabled but not required. Again, this is a man-in-the-middle attack, and it's also a medium threat level. For the 10.0.2.4, same results as the previous two, the same HTTP, RTSP, and SSL expired, and the same vulnerability, message signing enabled but not required. For the 10.0.215, however, I wasn't able to get any results from the Nmap and ZenMap because while scanning, there was a Windows update on my local machine and it did not save the results, and I was unable to redo the scan due to time constraints. As for the vulnerabilities shown in these four hosts, our team lead Michael will explain the vulnerabilities that were found in these hosts later on in this presentation. Without further ado, I pass it on to Raj to talk about what he found in the 172.16.1 subnet.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karun Rao, and today I'll be going through my analysis and findings on the 172.16.1.0 network, which was assigned to me by Michael as part of our network reconnaissance and vulnerability assessment. I started off by running an Nmap ARP scan on the subnet 172.16.1.0. ARP scans are especially useful on local networks because they use address resolution protocol to identify active hosts even when firewall rules might block typical ping requests. Through this scan, I was able to discover that the following hosts were active and reachable: 172.16.1.1, 172.16.1.15, 172.16.1.111, 172.16.1.115, and 172.16.1.117. Nmap also confirmed that these hosts were up, and interestingly, all 1,000 default TCP ports, all 1,000 default ports scanned on these systems were in an ignored state. This typically means that either the ports are closed, filtered by a firewall, or the services are simply not listening on common ports, making further enumeration more challenging. After identifying live hosts, I proceeded with service-specific scans to probe for commonly used ports. Next slide, please. I paid special attention to port 80, which is HTTP, and 443, HTTPS, as these are typical indicators of a web-based interface or service running on a machine. Out of all of the hosts, only 172.16.1.15 had both port 80 and 443 open. This indicated the presence of an HTTP and HTTPS service, possibly a web server, administrative interface, or another web-based application. This made 172.16.1.15 the most interesting host for further investigation. To dive deeper into potential security weaknesses, I then ran a few Nmap vulnerability scripts, including the well-known Heartbleed script and a basic vulnerability detection script. These scripts are typically used to identify critical CVEs in common services like OpenSSL or misconfigured web services. However, in this case, none of the scripts returned any actionable results. This could mean that the services are properly patched or configured securely, or that the scripts weren't able to detect anything due to restrictions or the type of service running behind those ports. Since I wanted a more thorough scan beyond what Nmap could offer, I turned to Legion, a powerful multi-threaded tool for reconnaissance and enumeration. It offers a GUI and runs multiple scanning utilities in the background, including Nmap, SMB scans, and more. Unfortunately, the connection was lost midway during the Legion scan, and I wasn't able to complete the full enumeration process. This means I couldn't extract further detailed insights or vulnerability data from that host using Legion, which limited the depth of my analysis at that stage. With that, I'd now like to hand over the floor to Michael, who will present his findings and provide a more detailed breakdown of the remaining hosts and services.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Clevenger. I am the team lead for Byte Bandits, also double dipped as technician for this project. We were originally assigned the Bank of Texas simulated over the SimSpace lab. However, after having 4 weeks of issue and unable to get any results in that environment, we were switched over to the Santec environment, and we were to begin commence scanning. We were told only to worry about vulnerability scanning and not exploitation. And I will now begin going over my findings. To start, I wanted to start by going over the methodology that was involved in my process when I was scanning. To begin, I started using Nmap to kind of map out all of the networks and the adjacent subnets that were possible using a pretty basic discovery scan. And upon realizing that I was not getting any pings back, or everything was showing up, realizing that the pings were being blocked likely by the firewall, I decided to do a little bit more research and decide that I needed to do a little bit more conservative scans and tone down the timing a bit so that it wouldn't be detected by the firewall. And then once I started doing that, I actually got the results that I was looking for. So to begin, I noticed the 1002 network subnet, and there were 4 hosts that I was able to scan. This particular network, I used Nessus Essentials on a Kali box, and through the VPN connected to the network, and then I scanned the 1002 network with Nessus, and it provided a detailed analysis and report based on the vulnerabilities on each of the systems. To start, we have host 10022, and it has 1 medium and 1 low vulnerability. 1002, 1003, 1024 all have the SMB signing not required vulnerability. So I kind of wanted to lump those together for time's sake. That is a medium vulnerability with a CVSS score of 5.3. This impact is it obviously allows man-in-the-middle attacks. Network attackers could intercept and modify the SMB traffic, and this requires medium potential exploitation. So this requires just a medium level of alert. It's not critical, but it still needs to be addressed as soon as possible. And then the DHCP server detection, which is a low CVS score of 3.3. And this is really only a threat for network reconnaissance or disclosure, which is still obviously a threat, because if they're able to get the information, they can begin formulating how to attack. Some additional observations that I observed about 10022, 10023, and 10024 were that these systems appeared to be Windows in a virtualized environment. There was multiple information disclosures, including the Windows Net BIOS, the SMB data OS fingerprinting, which provided me with enough information to analyze the host. The recommendations for 10022 are also going to be the same for 10023 and 10024. That's going to be to configure the SMB signing as required, to restrict SMB net BIOS visibility to trusted networks only, and you are going to want to review the DHCP server security configuration, the total aggravated score for this host, and the 1002.3 and 1002.4. They're all going to be an aggravated score of 5.3 due to the fact that the score is counted by the highest vulnerability that is present. So those are all going to be 5.3. I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to move along to 10.02.15. This system had 3 criticals, 4 highs, 2 mediums. The critical and vulnerabilities included Apache Log4j with a CVS score of 9.8. This has an extremely crucial impact of remote code execution. Individuals would be able to potentially exploit and then run applications, begin running scripts and other things on the system. Node.js, it says multiple vulnerabilities here with a CVSS score of 9.8. Potentially remote code execution or denial of service is the impact. And then threat vector is obviously malicious input processing in the Node.js applications. The exploitation potential is moderate to high on this one, of course, depending on your application exposure. And then we got Apache log4j SCOL, which is a critical CVSS of 10.0. This impact is pretty high as no security updates are available for this end-of-life software. The threat vector, any unpatched vulnerabilities become permanent risk, and the exploitation potential is high due to attackers knowing this vulnerability in the EOL software. And to continue going over the notable highs, Node.js with a high score of 8.2. This just indicates that there are multiple vulnerabilities across different versions of Node.js, and this presents a significant risk to web applications. We got Apache log4j JMS appender with a CVSS of 7.5. The impact is remote code execution if JMS appender is used. Malicious JNDI connections would be the threat vector, and then exploitation potential is high, specifically in environments using JMS with log4j. There's a few medium vulnerabilities as well. It's got a few invalid SSL certificate that cannot be trusted. That's a CVSS score of 6.5. Can lead to man-in-the-middle attacks against the HTTP connections. Network attackers would be able to spoof secure sites, given the fact that the HTTPS is vulnerable, and this threat level is moderate and requires user interaction to bypass some of the warnings. And then we got the Intel Media SDK with multiple vulnerabilities. Score is 4.8. The impact is for potential privilege escalation or information disclosure. The threat vector would have to be local exploitation, so the exploitation potential is low to moderate due to the fact that it requires local access. And then moving on, we have some additional observations about this particular host. It's running multiple critical services to include web server Apache, Docker, Postgres, SQL database, several Node.js applications, and the system has numerous potentially vulnerable components, including OpenSSL, Java, PHP, and Ruby. For our recommendations and immediate actions, we would recommend upgrading Apache log4j to the latest 2.x version, update Node.js to the latest secure version, and replace any self-sign or invalid SSL certificates with trusted ones. Short-term actions, we're going to perform a comprehensive patching of all identified vulnerable components, review Docker container security, and implement network segmentation to limit exposure. For long-term actions, we're going to implement a robust vulnerability management program, consider application-level firewalls or runtime application self-protection, also known as RASP, regular security testing and monitoring. And the total aggravated score for this host is 10.0 with that critical unpatched vulnerability. Moving on, we have a network-wide CVS score analysis, and that's going to be 10.0. The network's risk profile is defined by its most vulnerable host, which is .15. And while 3 hosts only have medium, since the network is defined by the host with the most risk profile, so the overall risk is 10.0. And then here we have a CVSS score distribution across the network by host, vulnerabilities listed, and then the highest CVSS, and then we have risk level as well. And then this is going to be our conclusion for the subnet. The network has an overall CVSS score of 10.0, which is critical, driven primarily by the multiple critical vulnerabilities on host .15. And while 75% of the hosts only have medium severity vulnerabilities, the presence of even one critically vulnerable host with multiple high-impact vulnerabilities defines the entire network as critically at risk. The Windows hosts share a common medium vulnerability that, while less severe individually, could enable lateral movement for attackers who compromise the critical Linux host. .15. This lateral movement potential further justifies the critical overall network assessment, as the initial compromise could quickly spread to the entire subnet. Remediation should focus first on the critical and high vulnerabilities on .15 followed by addressing the SMB configuration issues across all Windows hosts to prevent potential lateral movement. And at the bottom of the slide here, we have a risk assessment matrix, giving the probability, impact, hosts affected, and the overall risk. And so the combined risk for all the hosts is critical. And then moving on, this 172.16.1 was the other subnet that was detected. Unfortunately, for the vulnerability scanning on this one, I was unable to get Nessus Essentials to scan it. And I did not have more time to work with in order to try and get that to work. So for this network, I unfortunately was only able to do vulnerability scanning and with Nmap scripts. But we're going to go ahead and begin with 172.16.1.1. Some of the key vulnerabilities here, we have a medium, which is regarding the CSRF vulnerabilities, the cross-site request forgery. This has a CVSS score of 6.5. The impact can lead to unauthorized actions performed on behalf of authenticated users. Social engineering combined with web application vulnerabilities is a threat vector, and exploitation potential is medium. These vulnerabilities were particularly found on the Mongoose HTTP server on port 3000, including this action with the authorized.html, giving the unauthorized users a way in. The slowest DOS attack, this is going to be a high CVSS score of 7.5. The impact is denial of service to web services. This is going to be a network-based resource exhaustion attack. High is the exploitation potential with publicly available tools. This can be exploited with minimal skill. The Nginx web server on port 8443 is vulnerable to the slowest attack. And moving on, we also have a critical JMX console authentication bypass with a score of 9.8. This is going to have an impact of unauthorized administrative access, and the threat vector is remote, and the exploitation potential is high because no authentication would be required. The JMX console authentication is not required, potentially allowing unauthorized access to management functions. And then some of the notable open services, port 53, the Unbound DNS server, port 3000, which is the Mongoose with the vulnerabilities, port 444, which is OpenSSH 9.4, port 8443, Nginx. The recommendations for this host would be to implement connection rate limiting on Nginx to mitigate slower attacks, add CSRF tokens to all forms on the Mongoose HTTP server, secure the JMX console with proper authentication, review DNS server configuration for potential misconfigurations. Moving on to the next host in the subnet would be 172.16.1.15. I did not get any vulnerability information specifically back on this, other than all the open ports, which still in itself is a vulnerability. We have port 80, port 443, port 515, printer service, port 631, another printer service. So based on those few services, we can pretty accurately guess that this is a printer. Port 3000, which is a folder PPP service, port 9100, Jet Direct Printer Protocol. And these are some of the security observations. Nothing really too noticeable of noteworthiness. The recommendations would be to review the necessity of having all these printer protocols exposed, ensure printer services have up-to-date firmware and restricted access, and consider implementing network segmentation for the printer services. And we went ahead and gave this a CVSS score of 4.3 medium, just based on the exposed printer services, which typically have less security scrutiny to begin with. Moving on, the next host was 172.16.1.111. This is a Linux box. The first vulnerability that we have listed here is a critical. It's the PHP myadmin directory traversal, the CVSS score of 9.8. The impact is local file inclusion allowing attackers to read sensitive files. So the threat vector is that remote attackers can include local files via the redirect parameter, and exploitation potential is high because this is a publicly known exploitable attack with known techniques. This vulnerability allows for reading of local files, potentially exposing sensitive configuration data or PII or any other data that you might have stored on the machine that's being attacked. Next we have Apache byte range filter DOS. This is a CVSS score of 7.8, and this is going to be impact of basically denial of services to the web services. And then threat vector is network based. It's going to attack requesting numerous overlapping byte ranges, and this is high exploitation potential. It's easily exploitable, and it doesn't require a whole lot of skills or knowledge. The Nginx web server is going to be vulnerable to denial of service attack when multiple overlapping byte ranges are requested. Some open services of note: port 443, which is the Nginx 1.16.1, multiple vulnerabilities, and then port 5060, which is the SIP service session initiation protocol, typically for VoIP. The recommendations here are going to be to update phpMyAdmin to a current version. The current version extremely outdated from around 2005. Apply Apache Nginx patches to address the byte range filter vulnerability. And then we are going to review SIP configuration for potential security issues, and also consider implementing a web application firewall to protect vulnerable applications. Host 172.16.1.115. Wasn't able to get a whole lot of vulnerability summary for this. I was able to see that port 443 was open and that was running Nginx. Yeah, there was limited attack service with only HTTPS exposed. So my only recommendation for this is to ensure Nginx is kept up to date with security patches, implement regular vulnerability scanning to detect any potentially new issues in the future. Host 172.16.1.117. This has a medium vulnerability of sensitive directory exposure, and it has a CVSS score of 5.3. Impact is that information can be disclosed, and it is potentially an attack vector. The threat vector is web application reconnaissance. Exploitation potential is medium because it requires a bit further exploitation. Description: these potentially sensitive directories were detected right here, these three. And then the open services, we have port 443, Nginx HTTP server with sensitive directory exposure. So the recommendations for this would be to remove or secure example directories in production environments, ensure proper access controls for API endpoints, review application for potentially sensitive information disclosure. Moving on, we're going to talk about the overall network assessment for 172.16.1. Attack vector analysis. We have web application security. We have the fact that multiple hosts with web services exhibit various vulnerabilities, to include CSRF, directory traversal, and JMX console issues, suggesting insufficient application security practices. Combined risk allows for the potential compromise of multiple systems. Two hosts are at risk for denial of service, .1 and .11, and this could be leveraged to disrupt network services. Information disclosure: we have directory listings and sensitive path exposure on .117, and phpMyAdmin directory traversal on .111. And together, both of these provide reconnaissance opportunities for attackers. The printer services on host .15 exposes multiple printer-related services, often overlooked in security planning, but can provide network access nonetheless. The environmental CVSS score for this network is going to be base aggregate score of 9.8. This is based on the highest vulnerability. And then the modified environmental vector is the This CVSS 3.0 wasn't exactly able to fully research with the time left to fully disclose what this means. But the justification is that critical vulnerabilities on multiple hosts with potential for full compromise. And then down here, we have an overall network risk assessment. The CVS score analysis by host is shown below. We have the host in the first column, the CVS score, followed by risk, and then this actually breaks it down by key vulnerabilities on each host. Now we're going to talk about the prioritized remediation plan that we recommend. The highest priority, which would be the critical risk, we would suggest addressing the JMS console authentication bypass on host.1, patch the PHP myadmin on host.111, or replace it with a current version. Implement mitigations for DOS vulnerabilities on both host.1 and host.111. The high priority actions would be to add CSRF tokens to all forms on host.1, remove or secure sensitive directories on host.117, review and secure printer services on host.15. The medium priority would be to implement network segmentation to isolate vulnerable hosts, deploy a web application firewall to protect vulnerable services, perform comprehensive vulnerability scanning with authenticated tests. Low priority would be to review DNS server configuration on host.1 and document all network services and create a security baseline. The conclusion for this subnet exhibits several critical security vulnerabilities across multiple hosts. The most concerning issues are the JMS console authentication bypass and PHP myadmin directory traversal, both scoring a critical 9.8 on the CVS scale. Additionally, the presence of DOS vulnerabilities on web servers could affect availability of network services. With only 5 out of 256 potential hosts responding to the scan, this represents a relatively small attack surface. However, the severity of vulnerabilities on these hosts makes a subnet a high-risk environment. A systematic approach to addressing the vulnerabilities, beginning with the critical issues, would significantly improve the security posture of this network. The variety of vulnerabilities spanning application security, DOS, and information disclosure indicates a need for a comprehensive security program addressing technical remediation, secure configuration management, and ongoing vulnerability assessments. And this concludes the network vulnerability assessment by Bandits on the Santec simulated network.